This is War Room Impeachment, episode 69 on December 12th, 2019, polling day in the UK, impeachment drama here in the US. I'm joined here in studio in the historic Breitbart Embassy with Raheem Kassam, and we have Steve Bannon on the line. Ready to go, Steve?
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Doing excellent. Great work this morning on CNBC. You want to start off by giving us a quick recap of what you talked about with the Squawk Box crew?
It was about the China deal and what's going to happen this weekend, and also about impeachment. And in that, and I know we've got, I'm just catching up with you guys. We got the Louis Gohmert, Raheem had pulled it, but you know, I said that one of the things is that the impeachment's going to the Senate. The new focus is either on acquittal or exoneration. And I think what the president's arguing for, given, you know, he understands the historic nature of this, is for a full trial and exoneration. And I said today on CNBC, I think he's, you know, Dershowitz has been added as a constitutional lawyer. I think he ought to think about adding Matt Gaetz, Lee Zeldin, and Judge Louis Gohmert from Texas as additional lawyers to his team to help the team, because I think these fire breathers are the kind of guys you need to get not just witnesses of fact up there, but grill people on the stand.
Absolutely. And Steve, I want to make sure we don't get too far away from this, but you're on talking about the looming tariff deadline. His producer, Dan, is adjusting some lights here in the War Room studio, so that's the sound effects we have. But Steve, real quick, why does December 15th matter in the trade debate and what's going on?
Well, because on 15th is when the last round of tariffs go on, particularly for the consumer electronics equipment, and President Trump's winning right now. I mean, it's one of the reasons that he's got the wind to his back, or he's starting to turn around on this impeachment effort, is that the economy is so strong because of his actions. And one of the reasons the economy is strong is that tariffs work. The tariffs are working. All the misdirection plays of the Wall Street crowd are wrong. And I think that he's got the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, on the ropes. Their economy is a disaster. They're at zero growth. All these companies now in the New York Times today is this huge story about all the companies are starting to default on billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of debt. Trump is winning. He's winning the economic war, which is broader even than the trade war. So, to me, he's got all the cards. They haven't lived up to any of their obligations. The story about they're not going to buy any American computer equipment, which is 20 million individual pieces, it was leaked this week, but it was promulgated by the Chinese Communist Party over a year ago. That means while they were negotiating the bigger deal with President Trump, they were making every effort underway to decouple technologically from the West. They are decoupling from the Western industrial democracies. And I think this is what President Trump understands this, and I think you're going to see a very steady hand, a very stable hand in dealing with these guys.
Great. And before I hand it over to Raheem to give us the breakdown of what happened with the Judiciary Committee's blusterfest last night, and they're just swearing folks in and getting ready to go behind us on CNN at the moment. Steve, I want to get from you critical meeting tomorrow at the White House on this trade deal or on the trade negotiation efforts. Do we have a prediction from the Steve Bannon what's going to happen with these tariffs on December 15th?
The president's going to look at the facts, and I think the facts will lead him to the conclusion that he can always take them off, that the tariffs should go on. I think the economy, somebody told me when I came on today, Dow futures were down 50. When I finished, they were down 20. I think the market and people are starting to understand that everybody wants in on the American economy, and one of the reasons they do, he's bringing the supply chains back to the United States. What President Trump has articulated, as you remember, Jason, on the campaign trail in the primaries, in 15, on the campaign trail in 16, and then in his presidency, so we're now almost 5 years into this, that everything he's talked about he was going to do, he's done, and it's working. And the fact that it's working, it's now, you know, besides all the cheerleading that came from the Wall Street faction and the corporatists, that Trump's plan is right, and I believe it'll lead him to the conclusion he can't trust these guys on any deal that they cut. They haven't even agreed to agriculture, to the little skinny deal they tried to do in October. They've walked away from that. So I believe that it will lead the president to the conclusion when he looks at the facts to put the tariffs on, put him in a tougher place, and cut the best deal he can.
Wow. Steve Bannon is on the record. Steve, I'm going to take the other direction just so we have a healthy debate on that. We'll come back later. Raheem, let's get into what happened last night. There's a great story in the Washington Post this morning from Rachel Bade, who I think is a very excellent reporter at the Post. 4 notable buried leads. Number one, Democrats are having to whip both impeachment votes, as there's now some talk with the vulnerable members of voting for one article but against the other. Democratic defections are growing. The new spin is we should only lose about a half dozen. 3, vulnerable Democrats are freaking out over the polling numbers that are tanking on impeachment. And number 4, the grassroots are lighting up the phone lines to these members of Congress. Raheem, what happened last night and what's going to happen today?
Well, look, I mean, it's a big 24 hours, as we've had a lot of big 24 hours recently, and the one last night was no different in the sense that you had the cases made, maybe rehashed, you might say, but the cases made, articulated by the members last night in the committee about just why the Democrats think, the ones that do believe it in earnest, think that the president should be impeached. They laid out their case. The Republicans laid out the counter case. Nothing particularly new coming up there, apart from maybe Louis Gohmert's naming or maybe not naming of the whistleblower, depending on what the media tells us we're allowed to know.
Raheem, let's jump in on this point because Louis Gohmert read off a series of names last night. I mean, he just read off. You know what? Let's play the clip and then have you break it down for us.
We'll do that right now.
Years we've heard from people that are now in the majority talk about the crimes of the president. And where are they? Well, they kept saying, Mr. President, come in, you got to testify. We will be fair with you. Come tell us about the crimes. And here's the crimes you've committed. And where are they now that we have the articles of impeachment? A vague abuse of power, obstruction of Congress, the very things the majority has done in preventing us from having the witnesses that could shed light on this, not opinion, but fact witnesses. We needed to hear from those witnesses, people like Sean Misko, Abigail Grace, Eric Chiramella, Devin Archer, Joe Biden, Ellie Orr, Alexandra Chalupa, and so many others. They don't want fact witnesses. Let's hear from professors who hate Donald Trump.
Just a list of names.
Yeah, so is Hunter Biden the whistleblower? Because I didn't hear Congressman Gohmert.
Nellie Orr, the whistleblower?
Yeah, or Devin Archer. I mean, this Devin Archer person I'm not super familiar with, but is this the whistleblower? So I don't know, why is the media freaking out today?
Of course, and if you were following it real time last night on Twitter, the media all worked up into a tizzy about this. Louis Gohmert just named the whistleblower. Hold on, I thought we didn't know who the whistleblower was. I thought the whistleblower was anonymous. What they mean to say is the public is not allowed to know who the whistleblower is. Only the people in Washington, D.C., only the people at Politico, only the people at CNN are allowed to know who the whistleblower is.
Exactly. Steve, what were your thoughts on what happened last night?
Hey, I tell you what my thoughts were is that what I think that Dershowitz is fine. The president ought to augment his team with Gates, Zeldin, and Judge Gohmert. Okay, I think he needs fire breathers. He should be exonerated. His place in history should be solidified about this phony impeachment. You know, this impeachment light. But I think you need guys who can bring the heat, like Judge Gohmert did. I thought Judge Gohmert, and that was only 2 minutes of a 5.5 minute role he was on, which was to me the most stunning and best summary of this entire process. And so I think you're seeing, as the Washington Post said in those buried leads, the grassroots and people that have supported the president now feel that the wind's to their back in this sham process, and I think it's time now to really bring the heat.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that we're talking about here, Steve, or we've been talking about, are the opportunity costs. What have we been missing out on? What should we push the ball downfield on next? One of the things, we just have about a minute and a half here before we go to the break on the end of this first segment. We're starting to hear reports, a number of different troubling issues. This is a big buried lead for anyone who's a supporter of President Trump and a supporter of our economy, is the timing, the Senate timing of what this USMCA vote might be. We've seen Leader McConnell say it's definitely going to be after the first of the year. We're hearing some troubling reports that might not be until after impeachment. So this could be pushing it back later. Steve, we talked about this yesterday. You made the point that we need to get this done now. We need to pass it before we break. What are your thoughts on hearing that we might not be?
This is, and Jason, you know this better than I do. You've got a different take. You think it's a great way to start 2020. I think you just get on with it. If the House passes it, I think they even stay a couple extra days and just do it now. Let's get Japan's new trade deal kicks in January 1st. I'd like to end the year with this great North American, the new NAFTA deal, USMCA. I think you just get on with it and get it done, and then go have a real trial in the Senate, and that trial should take as long as it should take to exonerate Donald J. Trump.
And you know what, Steve? I completely agree with you now. If we were going to come back and vote on USMCA, say on January 6th, then I would be all about it. I'd say I'd be fine with that. But here's the problem. You leave something out there without voting on it, the only thing that can happen is people find reasons to nitpick it or to shoot it down. This is terrible. To me, it seems like they're hanging it out there to dry. I want to pass this, give President Trump the big win, let's get back to doing the work for the people. And before we go to break here, reminder, we're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. This is War Room Impeachment. We're on Newsmax TV, Salem Radio, all the podcasts. Download us. We'll be right back.
Bannon, Miller, Kassam. War Room Impeachment.
On the John Fredericks Radio Network.
And we are back at War Room Impeachment, episode 69, December 12th, 2019. I'm Jason Miller, joined here in studio by Raheem Kassam. And up in New York, we have Stephen Bannon. Raheem, I want to, before we dive into this OMB story, just remind folks that we're here on the John Fredericks Radio Network, also on Newsmax TV, Salem Radio nationally, of course, our good friends at americasvoice.news, where you can catch us streaming, and of course, warroom.org, one of the fastest growing conservative sites out there. Raheem, take us into the Washington Post big OMB story this morning, how this further exonerates President Trump.
Look, a lot of things are getting lost in the greater media, chasing the will they, won't they story over impeachment. And one of those stories, of course, as we mentioned earlier on the John Fredericks show, Jason, was the story about the farming bill that was published yesterday, that was passed yesterday in the House, and we'll get to that later in the show. But another one of the stories that isn't really getting the headlines it should right now is this new legal memo from the Office of Management and Budget. The Washington Post has the story and has done a pretty good job with the story, I believe. Jeff Stein and Josh Dorsey talking about this new legal memo, which goes to show that the Office of Management and Budget within the White House complex first began discussing the Ukraine aid back in June the 19th. This was before, I believe, anybody else had anything to do with the Zelensky-Trump relationship.
5 weeks. That is 5 weeks before this Zelensky phone call.
Right. It's a pretty big buried lead there, because remember, the Jerry Nadlers and the Adam Schiffs and the Daniel Goldmans and the Fiona Hills, they all want you to think that President Trump had this sort of spur-of-the-moment idea about putting Zelensky in a box, right, in a public box, they keep saying, putting pressure on him, withholding a White House meeting, withholding the aid in order to force Zelensky's hand into doing something untoward. But actually what we see here, this is a legal memo from OMB. This shows, and there is documentary evidence to show that actually the Ukraine aid was the subject of a big fat question mark way before any of this other stuff was on the table. This is one of the things, every so often we get something. This is one of the big somethings that will be and should be remembered about this whole impeachment case, is because this, again, comes down to detail. This is documentary, evidentiary record stuff that goes to show that this was nothing like a domestic political errand, and everything like scrutiny that the Obama administration never showed, scrutiny that the Bush administration never showed for foreign aid.
Steve, you have consistently said that the facts are our friends.
But this is what's stunning about this, is how is this just coming up now? This is the part about the sham process, right? These kind of facts should have been presented. This is what's so stunning about this, and this is why I just want to go back. I don't want to sound like a broken record. The president, I think that this discussion between Mitch McConnell and the president is fundamental to the Trump movement. It's fundamental to the Trump presidency going forward. It's those types of facts that Raheem just pulled out of the Josh Dorsey and the Washington Post story that I think need to come to light. And I think the president can be fully exonerated, and to put this thing, not let this thing try to smear or taint his legacy 100 years from now. But the people, when the details really came up, remember, Jason, unity and substance. Unity and substance. He understood, and Tony Saig and Pam Bondi, the other team that went in there to augment Kellyanne and Stephanie, the rest of the team, the thing, understood. In the details comes the exoneration of Donald J. Trump.
Is this coming out now, Steve and Jason? Because or rather, let me rephrase this question: are the Democrats speeding up this whole process now? They're putting it on burners because they know that this memo was either about to drop, or they had maybe heard about it or seen about it. Because the memo's details basically go in and they show that they were responding to a request from the Government Accountability Office. There had been 8, I think, temporary freezes placed on this. There was investigation internally, as you would expect, as to what the aid was, why it was going there, what it was being spent on, whether other partners in the world were doing the same thing. There were legitimate concerns over this.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine is the 3rd most corrupt country in the entire world, according to Ernst & Young. That's just not us saying
Why did
it.
I hear that? I heard that on Anderson Cooper one time.
And I heard that, from Raheem Kassam a number of times. The IMF, people, do you realize this? The IMF is withholding aid to the Ukraine because they're so corrupt, they don't know how the money is being spent. And so you have all of these concerns before we go and ship off, whether it's 391 million in Javelin missiles and such, or whether it's another 250 million that we dole out by the NDAA from Congress every year. In fact, the NDAA, which we're on the cusp of passing out of Congress right now, mandates that Congress tie anti-corruption efforts to aid going to Ukraine. Yes. Steve?
It's fact. This is what, let's get back to it. It's the facts. In the details, in the granularity, is where the real truth of this comes up. And I agree with Raheem. I think they're speeding this thing up now, because if this memo is just coming to light, what else is going to come into light? So they're going to speed this up. This will be another cluster today at the judiciary markup, and then they'll speed this through, and they'll try to do some truncated debate in the House. But I got to tell you, if you're a Democrat, particularly in Virginia 7 and Virginia 2 and other areas of the John Fredericks Radio Network, you got to be very nervous. As more facts come out, people are just going to be, I think, more disgusted of where the Democrats have spent their time.
Well, let me dive a little bit more into the the granularity on all this. That's what happens. I speak for 4 hours on the radio. The granularity of this stuff. The OMB memo also pushes back against what I suppose they think the Democrat pushback will be on this. In the memo, the OMB says the agency frequently puts temporary holds on money already signed into law, and that Congress also stops money that has already been approved from reaching federal agencies. In the footnote, the OMB calls on the nonpartisan GAO, the Government Accountability Office, to look into what it says are Congress's own moves to hold up money already signed into law, and asserts that while OMB should notify Congress before delaying allocation of some funds, the Ukraine assistance amounts to a programmatic delay that does not require notification, and they cited a prior GAO opinion to back that up. This is a routine, regular thing that is done from OMB. The independent GAO has already cited in previous years and previous times that this is perfectly allowed for programmatic reasons, especially on something as contentious as Ukraine and corruption.
Well, and Raheem, that's why I started off this segment, or the last segment, when we were talking about the fact that Democrats are worried about losing more moderate or vulnerable members to this. We've heard the names Kendra Horn, Joe Cunningham from South Carolina, Ben McAdams from Utah, Steve Bannon's good friend Anthony Brindisi from the Utica area in New York. The reason why I throw that little heckle out there is Brindisi has had Steve's comments put in his face a number of different interviews along the stretch here. But there's an important part here from Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan. The fact she's saying that she's not decided overall how she's going to vote. Well, obviously she's decided. But
she said she hadn't read the articles of impeachment yet, as of yesterday.
Yeah, and she says, listen to this. She says, while her district is this is a quote, overall not supportive of impeachment, end quote, she said some votes require members to go with their gut over constituents' wishes. Raheem, is this just absolute peak panic from the Democrat side?
I think they're totally at peak panic right now. That's why they're doing what they're doing today. That's why we saw at 7 p.m. to nearly midnight last night these hearings in the Judiciary Committee. We're going to see the same thing today, and the rush to pass these articles by, what is it, Tuesday, Jason? That's panic.
Stay here, folks. We'll be right back after the break with special guest Sidney Powell, author of License to Lie, and the attorney for General Mike Flynn. We'll be right back on War Room Impeachment.
War Room Impeachment. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
And we are back at War Room Impeachment. This is Jason Miller, joined here in the Breitbart Embassy by Raheem Kassam. We have Stephen K. Bannon on the line. Here, of course, on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Newsmax TV, Salem Radio, warroom.org, americasvoice.news. You can catch us everywhere. We're now joined on the line by a very special guest, Sidney Powell, author of bestseller License to Lie, exposing corruption at the DOJ and FBI, an attorney for over 500 plus federal appeals, and currently the counsel for General Mike Flynn. Sidney?
Good morning.
Hi, thank you so much for having us on. Really appreciate it. Want to dive right into the hottest news story right now, which is yesterday's trip by Michael Horowitz with the IG report going up to Lindsey Graham's Judiciary Committee. Would love to get your take as someone who's so steeped in this, in the legal expertise and exposing this corruption. Number one, what you thought about the IG report, but then yesterday, what you thought about Horowitz testifying in the Senate.
Well, absolutely stunning revelations of what I've been screaming about for 10 years now, and that's the FBI and the Department of Justice hiding exculpatory evidence that people are entitled to in legally, constitutionally, and ethically at every turn in any sort of criminal prosecution. And here we have the Department of Justice and FBI hiding every bit of it with respect to Christopher Steele from the FISA court and repeatedly getting these most intrusive of all possible warrants against Carter Page that not only enable them to get everything he had ever done in his life, but everything anybody had ever contacted him about, and then the information of all those contacts as well. So it's the two-hop rule. They could have gotten everything they wanted on anybody affiliated with the Trump campaign and more by virtue of those FISA warrants, and the warrants were all based on lies.
Hey, Sidney, I want you to get granular with us for a moment on this. That's what we like to do here on War Room Impeachment. So many folks aren't familiar with FISA warrants and how significant this is. Talk to us as someone who's a legal expert in hundreds of successful cases. Why is this lying and manipulating a FISA warrant application form by this Kevin Kleinsmith, this quote-unquote low-level FBI attorney? Why is this so stunning, and is this someone who, if convicted and guilty of this, should they be going to prison?
He should be. He definitely should be, because it's a federal felony to falsify evidence. It's essentially what he did: obstruction of justice, tampering with the evidence, any number of things it can be called, but everybody knows it's wrong. He literally completely changed the meaning of a communication from the CIA that was related to the FISA application. And it's even worse because the FISA court is super secret. Nobody appears for the defendant, that doesn't even know he's being charged as a defendant in the court. So there's no representation. That places an even heightened responsibility on the government to be honest with the court. The FISA judges almost rubber stamp these applications. They trust the government so much. Obviously, that is not deserved. I think the FISA court approves over 99% of the applications brought to them. And the warrant enables the FBI to get every email Carter Page has ever written, every email of anybody who had written to Carter Page, and every email of the people who wrote to the people who wrote to Carter Page.
Sidney, this is Raheem Kassam. Sorry to step on you. Raheem Kassam here. I just wanted to ask you, James Comey goes and says that he's vindicated by this. Horowitz is asked yesterday by Senator Lindsey Graham if it does vindicate James Comey, and Horowitz says, no, nobody's vindicated by the things we found. So what would you see are the next steps here? Does Comey have anything to answer for? Are there any criminal proceedings? What exactly goes on with a former director of the FBI here? What would you want to happen here?
Well, he could very well have criminal proceedings to answer for. That depends on what John Durham is finding in his investigation. And I would expect Mr. Kleinsmith, if he has a brain cell left in his head, to decide to cooperate with John Durham's investigation, because obviously something very serious was going on there. These people were all handpicked. If you handpick your team with the same purpose in mind, you don't have to have in-depth conversations about what the goal is. They all knew what it was to begin with because they all shared that goal. So there's going to be a lot of information that could come from Mr. Kleinsmith should he choose to do the right thing and tell Mr. Durham exactly what was going on there and why.
And Sidney, we're just about 20 seconds before we go into the break and want to have you back to elaborate a little more on this Durham report. But I think it's just stunning as someone who's not a legal expert and hasn't been following this and been active in this space for the past decade, how the media continually refers to Kleinsmith as some low-level attorney. But we're going to be back right after the break, again with Sidney Powell, author of best-selling License to Lie on War Room Impeachment.
Bannon, Miller, Kassam. War Room Impeachment
on the John Fredericks Radio Network.
And we are back at War Room Impeachment. I am Jason Miller here in the studio with Raheem Kassam. Stephen K. Bannon is on the line, and our special guest at the moment, Sidney Powell, author of bestseller Licensed to Lie, Exposing Corruption at the DOJ and FBI. Sidney, I want to ask you right off the top, you're obviously representing General Michael Flynn, is someone who I believe is an American hero who's nobly served our country, someone who many of us believe has been completely unfairly railroaded in this entire process. Is there anything about his case or about General Flynn personally that you're able to share at this point about how he's doing or what's going on, to the extent that you're able?
Well, he's doing very well, and he very much appreciates the support and notes, cards, letters, prayers, and contributions to the Mike Flynn Defense Fund.org that people from across the country send every day.
Can you say that again, Sidney, to make sure people got it?
Yes, Mike Flynn Defense Fund.org. And people have been so kind, thoughtful, generous, and supportive. I mean, we literally feel their prayers. It's been a very uplifting experience in many ways.
Great. Sidney, we want to play a clip for you from yesterday's exchange between Horowitz and Lindsey Graham. Raheem's going to play this one and get your reaction to it.
Former FBI Director James Comey said this week that your report vindicates him. Is that a fair assessment of your report?
I think the activities we found here don't vindicate anybody who touched this.
Okay.
Now, Sidney, you've worked on this, as you say, for about nearly 10 years, and the New York Post editorial this morning, the Horowitz report, is the absolute opposite of vindication for Jim Comey's FBI. You mentioned a few things about criminal proceedings earlier on in the interview in the last segment. Just give us a little bit more background, if you can, about what you know about the FISA process, and also what role Chief Justice Roberts should play in all of this. After all, I think, he's one of the biggest authorities on FISA, correct?
Yes, in fact, he is the only one, I think, who actually exercises any supervision over the FISA court because it's such a secret operation. It's really a star chamber. I knew an American citizen who was hauled in front of it one time. He was told he couldn't even tell a lawyer about it. He couldn't speak about it at all. And it's a terrifying experience when that happens to someone. It shouldn't. We just shouldn't even have a process like that. If an American citizen is going to be impacted by it, there should be an attorney to defend that person. The whole system there needs to be completely re-examined and definite limitations put on it. And the judges obviously need to be a lot more critical and refuse to just rubber stamp anything presented to them by the FBI. It's
Absolutely.
a very sad state of affairs when you can't trust what's supposed to be the premier law enforcement operation in the world.
So Sidney, is this the key here? It's not just individual problems. It's not some lawyers at the FBI. It's not even Comey. Is this, in your opinion, systemic to issues institutionally with the FBI and even with the rest of the intelligence apparatus, the CIA, do we have a massive systemic problem here?
I think we do have a systemic problem. It's been going on far too long. Look at what they did to former Senator Ted Stevens. They made up charges there, and they lied about the evidence. It's happened in countless cases. There are over 2,000 American citizens in the National Database of Exoneration. Granted, a lot of those came out of the state system, and frankly, it's even worse in the state system than it is in the federal system. Harvey Silverglate and I have collaborated on a new book called Conviction Machine, Standing Up to Federal Prosecutorial Abuse, that'll be coming out in February, I think, and we're proposing some solutions for reform, not the least of which is that the FBI be required to record its interviews of anyone.
Yeah, Sidney, why is that the case? Why doesn't the FBI record these as opposed to doing the written notes, especially with today's technology? Why aren't they doing that now?
Because Robert Mueller said it would be too much for them to handle when he testified to Congress several years ago.
Unbelievable.
As FBI director, right. Never mind that everybody has a cell phone in their pocket, or two, or three, that will record whatever, and it's all digital.
Well, and as we saw with Secretary Clinton after she had her FBI interview back on the 4th of July weekend in 2016, they just walked out and gave their side of the spin to CNN and the rest of the cameras immediately anyways.
And that's what they do when they want to convict somebody. They put down whatever they want in the 302. We found material alterations in the 302 that supposedly forms the basis of the false statements by General Flynn that were made the night of February 10, between February 10 and February 11, after Strzok and Page are texting each other. Lisa Page has made edits to it and left it on Bill Priestap's desk, and Strzok goes in to make her changes and more. And they add things to it that are neither supported by the notes nor happened in the conversation, and then that forms the supposed factual basis that they force him into pleading guilty to under all kinds of threats.
Should President Trump go for full exoneration in the Senate trial? Should he get lawyers like Gates and like Gohmert and people like you? Should he go full on and not ask just for an acquittal, but should he get all these people in there and make them witnesses of fact?
I think he should. I think he ought to subpoena and demand testimony from whoever he wants to demand it from, and yes, he should be completely exonerated. They haven't charged anything. It's the most baseless, ridiculous, farcical process and alleged substance of any impeachment proceeding in the history of the country.
Sidney, we got about a minute left. I want to get one important question for you. What do you want to see out of this Durham report that's coming up next? We got about a minute.
I've never heard of a U.S. attorney doing a report. I think he's going to indict people. That's what U.S. attorneys do.
Wow. That is
huge.
huge.
You're saying that there's certain people like Brennan and other Comey and McCabe and these guys should lawyer up?
Imagine they already have. If they haven't, they're even dumber than they look.
I'm trying to think of something to one up that line, and I can't. I mean, because that is that's great. We might have a fourth co-host here on War Room Impeachment pretty shortly. Again, we're honored to be joined today by Sidney Powell, author of the best-selling License to Lie: Exposing Corruption at the DOJ and FBI, the attorney for General Michael Flynn. And give us that website one last time before we go to break, Sidney.
MikeFlynnDefenseFund.org.
Thank you. Again, that's Sidney Powell, Raheem, and myself, and Steve Bannon will be back right after the break on War Room Impeachment on the John Fredericks Radio Network.
Bannon, Miller, Kassam. War Room Impeachment
on the John Fredericks Radio Network.
Welcome back to War Room Impeachment, Thursday, the 12th of December, 2019. Raheem Kassam, Jason Miller in the historic Breitbart Embassy. Steve Bannon joining us on the line, and it is an historic day, not just here in the United States. We're on Capitol Hill. The House Judiciary Committee continues the markup over impeachment ahead of the vote, but also across the Atlantic as well, where voters head to the polls in the United Kingdom for yet another general election, which will define what the Brexit process looks like. And for an American audience, because that's important. Why? Because the nullification project, as Steve Bannon always says, and of Brexit and of President Trump's presidency are one and the same thing. There is a potential for a US-UK trade deal that would further enrich the US economy, but only if Brexit gets done properly. We've seen the House Democrats try and thwart USMCA for the past year. We've heard in the past year Nancy Pelosi saying she doesn't believe that a UK-US trade deal should be a priority either. So the scene is set. The villains and the good guys are apparent in front of you, and that's what's going on in the United Kingdom. I want to pivot back right now to the Farm Bill, which passed in the House yesterday. This was quite an extraordinary bill that passed yesterday under the darkness of impeachment. This is a massive a million people who are undocumented, i.e. illegal in the United States. This could grant them legal status, Jason. This is under the auspices of having, the industry needs more workers and blah, 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 blah. We've heard that all before. But this is massive. How have we not heard more about this? Why isn't this leading the news? Why are the right-wing news sites not leading with 1 million people amnesty passing the House?
This is so explosive and so big, and that's why we had to talk about it here on War Room Impeachment. Why do we have immigration laws? Why are we fighting to build the wall? Why do we vote for President Trump, who's actually going to enforce the laws that are currently on the books, if we're just going to go and pass amnesty? Steve?
I think this bill ought to be vetoed. I think we ought to find out what the details are. And look, the farmers clearly need access to workers, but one way to do it is you start let labor markets work, and wages start to increase, and you start to get people. I think this has to be drilled down on. This is under the darkened night that was slipped under a farm bill on this amnesty, and I think particularly the Ann Coulters of the world and other people have to start to light this up. And if it's as bad as at least the first analysis is, it ought to be vetoed.
Steve, we got about a minute left. What else are you looking at today as we have the judiciary hearing?
The one big thing is back to Brexit is that, Raheem, did Boris Johnson throw away a potential 100-seat majority that would give him 5 years of full dominance and the ability to do a real Brexit by not partnering with Nigel Farage? And is this going to be a hung parliament, or is he going to have a skinny majority with the Tory mandarins that he's going to have to negotiate everything and get a very weak Brexit?
The lines outside the polling stations in big anti-Brexit areas are massive at the moment. That tells us that people are lining up to vote either for the Liberal Democrats or the Labour Party. Boris Johnson went from having a 100-seat potential majority about 5 weeks ago to having a 20 to 30-seat majority earlier this week. It now looks like we may have another hung parliament or a very, very slim majority indeed.
With about 10 seconds left, folks, this is War Room Impeachment. Jason Miller, Raheem Kassam, Stephen K. Bannon, warroom.org, John Fredericks Radio Network. We will be back tomorrow.